not remove goggles or face first until 10 seconds after first light.
Oh, that can't be good.
Indiana Jones is a legend, but behind the whip cracks and daring escapes lies a story few fans know. From deleted scenes and controversial edits to one nuclear fridge that nearly broke the franchise, the real adventures happened behind the camera. What really happened on that Nazi submarine? Why did Spielberg cut a $250,000 0-cents scene that could have saved the biggest plot hole in movie history? And how did one joke rewrite action movie history forever? Lucas started with a simple concept: a professor of archaeology who gets caught up in wild adventures. He wanted someone who could switch from lecturing about history in a classroom to surviving dangerous situations in the jungle. The character needed to be tough and clever, but also flawed enough to feel believable. One of Lucas's unexpected sources of inspiration was Scrooge McDuck, the Uncle Scrooge. Comic books he read as a child often featured treasure hunts in ancient ruins, and one story in particular had the duck performing a careful idol swap in a booby-trapped temple. An idea that eventually found its way into the opening of Raiders of the Lost Ark. But the character wasn't only inspired by fiction. Lucas also drew from real-life explorers. Roy Chapman Andrews, an American adventurer in the 1920s, who searched for dinosaur fossils in the Gobi Desert, had the look and attitude Lucas had in mind. Andrews wore a wide-brimmed hat, carried a pistol, and was seen as the prototype of the fearless explorer. His larger-than-life persona had an undeniable influence on what would become Indiana Jones. At first, Lucas named his new hero Indiana Smith. The name came from his own dog, Indiana, a name fans might recognize as also being the original inspiration for Chewbacca in Star Wars. However, when Lucas discussed the idea with Steven Spielberg in 1977, the name didn't go over well. Spielberg thought Smith sounded too plain or clunky. Lucas shrugged and suggested Jones instead. Spielberg agreed immediately. It was a small change, but one that gave the character a punchier identity. They even made a joke out of it years later in The Last Crusade, when Sean Connery's character says, "We named the dog Indiana." Spielberg's involvement in the project happened somewhat by chance. At the time, he was frustrated after being turned down for directing a James Bond film. He told Lucas about his disappointment while the two were on holiday in Hawaii. Lucas replied, "I've got something better than Bond." That was the first time he introduced Spielberg to the idea of Indiana Smith. Spielberg loved the concept and described it as James Bond without the gadgets. The two agreed to develop the idea further, and soon it began to take shape. The project moved quickly from concept to production. Lucas struck a deal with Paramount Pictures that gave him creative control over any future sequels, while Spielberg promised to stick to a tight budget. This was especially important because Spielberg's previous film, the big-budget comedy 1941, hadn't done well. The studio was nervous about spending too much money on another uncertain venture, so Spielberg had to get creative. To save money and time, he shortened the filming schedule from 85 to just 73 days. He reused old Star Wars sets, shot several scenes in a single day, and kept Indiana Jones in the same outfit for most of the film to avoid designing multiple costumes. These decisions weren't just about the budget. They ended up helping to define the film's fast-paced and practical style. The character of Indiana Jones evolved during this period. The early drafts showed him as a treasure hunter who wasn't afraid to bend the rules, possibly even taking artifacts for personal gain. He was inspired in part by archaeologists like Hiram Bingham, who famously rediscovered Machu Picchu, but also faced criticism for taking artifacts from Peru. Spielberg, however, felt this version made Indy seem too self-serving. He wanted the character to care about preserving history. Lucas initially imagined Indy as a gunslinger who would shoot first and ask questions later, but Spielberg pushed for a more principled hero. They eventually found a middle ground, someone who was rugged and quick-thinking, but ultimately guided by a moral compass. The final change of the character's name from Smith to Jones marked the last step before casting began, and that process turned out to be far more complicated than expected. Spielberg's first choice to play the role was Tom Selleck, who at the time was rising in popularity thanks to his role in Magnum P.I. Selleck did a full screen test, complete with the fedora and leather jacket, and looked the part. However, CBS, the network airing Magnum P.I., wouldn't release him from his contract. Despite desperate attempts, including Lucas personally contacting the network, the answer remained no. Just 3 weeks before filming was due to start, they needed a new lead. Lucas was hesitant to cast Harrison Ford. He didn't want audiences to associate the character too closely with Han Solo from Star Wars, which had been a massive success. But Spielberg felt Ford was the right choice. He lobbied hard for him and eventually won. Ford was hired for $1 million, 0 cents, less than half of what Selleck would have made. He brought a dry wit, physical toughness, and subtle intelligence to the role, qualities that helped define Indiana Jones for decades to come. One of the most iconic scenes in Raiders of the Lost Ark came about entirely by accident, and it highlights how the film's tight production schedule sometimes led to genius. In the famous Cairo marketplace scene, Indiana Jones is confronted by a skilled swordsman who brandishes his weapon with intimidating flair. Originally, this was supposed to be a long, choreographed fight, showing off Indy's whip skills and ending in a close-range battle. But by the time they were set to film, Harrison Ford had come down with food poisoning. He could barely stand for more than a few minutes. In a moment of exhaustion and humor, Ford suggested, "Why don't we just shoot the guy?" Spielberg liked the idea so much that he went with it. The result is one of the film's most memorable and quoted moments. It also saved the production an estimated $150,000, 0 cents, and several days of shooting. What could have been a setback became a piece of cinematic history. The budget remained a constant concern throughout production. Paramount executives were wary of spending $20 million, 0 cents, on a film that had no guarantee of success. Michael Eisner, one of the studio heads, reportedly referred to the project as a movie with above-the-line costs. To ease their concerns, Lucas agreed to take a portion of the profits instead of an upfront fee. Spielberg also storyboarded every major scene in advance to prevent delays and cut down on unnecessary expenses. Despite these limitations, Raiders of the Lost Ark went on to become the highest-grossing film of 1981, earning $389 million, 0 cents, worldwide. Lucas and Spielberg each walked away with more than $50 million, 0 cents, while Paramount's profit share dropped to just 12% due to the creative deal structure. The film's success proved that large-scale adventure stories could be made without bloated budgets. Spielberg later joked that they made a $40 million, 0 cents movie for half the price, and nobody noticed. The early development of Indiana Jones set the tone for everything that followed. It was a blend of old-fashioned storytelling, modern filmmaking, and a character who could be both fallible and heroic. What began as a nostalgic tribute to childhood favorites became a worldwide phenomenon, thanks to calculated risks, smart compromises, and a little bit of luck along the way. One of the most talked about moments in Raiders of the Lost Ark doesn't involve an ancient trap or a clever escape. Instead, it revolves around a scene that barely makes sense and has been confusing viewers for decades. In the film, Indiana Jones somehow survives a long journey by clinging to the periscope of a Nazi submarine. This single moment became the center of one of the biggest plot holes in movie history, not because it was a small oversight, but because it was never explained. In the scene, Indy sneaks aboard a German U-boat after tracking the Ark of the Covenant to a military convoy. He jumps onto the submarine as it's about to depart, and the next time we see him, he's arriving with it at a secret Nazi island base. But there's one huge problem. Submarines don't usually travel on the surface for extended periods. They dive, and when they do, the periscope goes down with them. And yet Indiana Jones somehow holds on to the outside of the sub for the entire journey, surviving what could have been several days at sea without food, water, or any explanation of how he avoided drowning. The movie never addresses this. There's no line of dialogue, no cutaway shot, no hint that the submarine stayed on the surface. Viewers were left to assume that Indy simply held on and survived. Over the years, fans debated the scene endlessly. Some tried to rationalize it, suggesting that maybe the submarine didn't submerge. Others argued that it was simply an oversight, a case of filmmakers prioritizing pace and drama over realism. In truth, there was originally a scene meant to explain everything. In early drafts of the film, and in a deleted sequence that was actually filmed, Indiana is shown tying himself to the periscope using his whip. This visual would have suggested that the sub stayed on the surface during the journey and that Indy was able to hold on safely. It also would have matched historical accuracy. Before and during World War II, submarines often traveled above water to conserve fuel and keep their air-breathing engines running. Fully submerging was reserved for attacks or evasion, so it's entirely plausible that this particular U-boat remained on the surface. This scene was even included in the official 1981 Raiders of the Lost Ark comic book adaptation. In the illustrated version, we see Indiana losing his whip and hat during the journey. The panel helps explain how he survived, and it adds a small sense of realism to an otherwise impossible situation. But when it came time to put the film together, Steven Spielberg made a different decision. When the scene was filmed, it didn't look convincing. According to production reports and crew accounts, the footage of Harrison Ford holding onto the fake periscope looked awkward and unrealistic. It didn't test well with early audiences, and Spielberg feared it would pull viewers out of the story. Cutting the scene saved an estimated $250,000, 0 cents. A significant amount given the tight budget they were working with. The director chose pacing and audience immersion over strict logic, deciding that most viewers wouldn't question the moment too much. However, the decision created one of the most famous plot holes in cinema. Over time, the debate only grew. In 2008, the New York Times named the submarine scene as one of the most puzzling in movie history. Online forums filled with theories, speculation, and even scientific breakdowns. Physicists ran calculations on how strong someone's grip would have to be to hold on during a submarine journey at sea. Unsurprisingly, the results weren't favorable to Indy's survival. One study estimated that even under ideal conditions, the force of wind and waves would likely knock a person off within hours. Despite all this, the scene became legendary. Spielberg later acknowledged it himself. In the 1999 DVD commentary, he said it was one of his biggest regrets in the film and that he wished he had kept the explanatory footage in. But by then, the moment had taken on a life of its own. It was no longer just a cinematic mistake. It had become part of the mythos of Indiana Jones. Things took another turn in 2012 when a grainy VHS copy of the deleted footage was leaked online. It showed the missing scene with Indy securing himself to the sub's periscope. Although the quality was poor, the video quickly went viral, racking up millions of views on YouTube. Fans were thrilled to see a piece of Indiana Jones history that had remained hidden for decades. The footage reignited discussions about the scene and whether the movie should have included it in the first place. Paramount took notice of the renewed interest. Later that year, when the Raiders of the Lost Ark Blu-ray was released, the studio included storyboards of the deleted scene. These drawings clearly showed Indy wrapping his whip around the periscope, confirming that the filmmakers had originally intended to make the moment believable. In a nod to the long-running debate, the 2023 film Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny even referenced the scene. A younger version of Indy jokingly tells someone, "Don't ask about the submarine," directly acknowledging the plot hole that had puzzled fans for so long. In hindsight, many fans accept the submarine scene for what it is, an odd moment in an otherwise tightly crafted film. It might not make sense, but it adds to the legend of Indiana Jones. He's a character who survives against the odds, who seems to defy logic at every turn. For some, that's part of the charm. As Harrison Ford himself once said, the audience doesn't want to see him follow every rule of science. They want to believe that he's indestructible. The submarine wasn't the only cut moment from Raiders of the Lost Ark that left fans with unanswered questions. There was another short but significant scene that would have explained why Indy and Marion closed their eyes during the film's final act. In the original script, there's a conversation between Indy, Marion's friend Salah, and an Egyptian religious figure named Imam. During that conversation, Imam reads an inscription from the Staff of Ra headpiece. It warns that those who look upon the opened ark will perish. This would have made it clear that Indy knew the consequences of staring at the ark's contents, which is why he shouts at Marion to keep her eyes shut during the climax. However, this exchange was cut for pacing reasons. Spielberg felt the scene slowed down the film too much in the middle and didn't add enough tension to justify its inclusion. As a result, when the ark is opened and the spirits inside begin to swirl around, it seems like Indy somehow knows what to do. Without any explanation, for years, audiences speculated on how he figured it out. Was it instinct? Was it a guess? The missing scene would have made it clear, but like the periscope moment, it was lost to the cutting room floor. There was also a comedic scene involving Salah, played by John Rhys-Davies, which was filmed but later dropped. In it, Salah tries to help Indy escape from the map room by lowering a rope. When the rope is lost, Salah quickly grabs bedsheets and even a Nazi flag to improvise a makeshift rope. In another take, he spills boiling tea on a young German soldier by mistake. According to crew members, Karen Allen and producer Frank Marshall couldn't stop laughing during filming. But Spielberg ultimately cut the scene because he felt it clashed with the serious tone of the surrounding sequences. Rhys-Davies later said it was one of the funniest things he had ever done on camera. In the end, many of these scenes might have added clarity or levity, but their removal didn't stop Raiders of the Lost Ark from becoming a massive success. Still, their absence added layers of mystery and fueled decades of fan discussion. The missing submarine logic, the unspoken ark warning, and Salah's comic misadventure are just a few examples of how much thought went into every part of the production, even the parts most people never saw. These cut moments reveal how decisions made in the editing room can shape the legacy of a film. Sometimes, removing a scene makes a story stronger. Other times, it leaves audiences scratching their heads. In the case of Indiana Jones, both outcomes became part of the character's long-lasting appeal. He's a man of action, not explanations, and perhaps that's exactly what makes his adventures so unforgettable. In 1984, Indiana Jones returned to the big screen in the Temple of Doom, but this time the tone was noticeably darker. The second film in the franchise, which served as a prequel to Raiders of the Lost Ark, pushed the boundaries of what audiences expected from an action-adventure story. While it introduced new characters, settings, and action sequences, it also sparked one of the biggest controversies in modern cinema, prompting lasting changes to how films are rated. One of the most unforgettable scenes in the Temple of Doom is the ritual performed by Mola Ram, the film's main antagonist. In this moment, the leader of the Thuggee cult appears to pull a man's still beating heart from his chest, using what seems to be supernatural power. The victim remains alive and screaming as he is lowered into a pit of fire, all while surrounded by hypnotized worshippers, chanting in unison. It was a shocking sequence, unlike anything audiences had seen before in a film targeting a broad audience. To achieve the effect, the filmmakers used advanced practical effects for the time. A prosthetic chest was created to simulate the man's body, and the footage of the wound sealing up was filmed in reverse to create the illusion of a magical recovery. It looked convincing, too convincing, according to many viewers and critics. Some television edits later removed the heart entirely, reframing the moment to look more like a symbolic ritual than a violent act. Despite these adjustments, the impact of the scene had already been made. This particular moment became a lightning rod for criticism. Parents and advocacy groups complained that the film was too intense for younger audiences. At the time, the MPAA, Motion Picture Association of America, only had a few major categories: G, PG, and R. Temple of Doom was rated PG, but many believed it crossed a line. It wasn't graphic enough for an R rating, but it clearly wasn't suitable for young children either. The public outcry, combined with similar issues in films like Gremlins, led to the creation of a brand new rating, PG-13. From that point on, the PG-13 category would act as a middle ground for movies that were too mature for children, but not explicit enough to require an R rating. Temple of Doom didn't receive the new rating retroactively, but it played a key role in making it happen. Beyond the heart scene, the film also tackled topics that were surprisingly heavy for a blockbuster. One of the central plot lines involves the forced labor of children. In the story, Indiana Jones discovers that the Thogi cult has been kidnapping children from nearby villages and forcing them to work in dangerous underground mines. These kids are seen in chains, digging for magical stones, while under constant threat from the cult's guards. The depiction of child exploitation was unusual in mainstream adventure films, and while the scenes were stylized, they still unsettled audiences. Some viewers felt that the film didn't treat the subject with the seriousness it deserved. The children were often presented as another obstacle for Indiana Jones to overcome, rather than as real characters with their own emotional weight. The scene where Short Round, Indy's young sidekick, is whipped and escapes his captors was especially intense. While it underscored the evil of the cult, it also left many viewers wondering whether it belonged in a film marketed toward families. The controversy didn't stop there. Much of the criticism centered around the film's portrayal of Indian culture. While Temple of Doom is set in a fictional region, it uses many real-world references and visuals. The Thuggee cult, for example, is loosely based on a historical organization that existed in India during the 19th century. British colonizers claimed that this group carried out ritualistic killings in the name of the goddess Kali. However, many modern historians believe those reports were exaggerated or even fabricated to justify British control over the region. In the film, Kali is presented as the deity worshipped by the villainous cult, but in Hinduism, Kali is a complex figure, often seen as a protector and a symbol of empowerment. Reducing her to a backdrop for evil acts caused considerable backlash. Hindu groups around the world criticized the film for distorting cultural beliefs and promoting harmful stereotypes. Even Amrish Puri, the Indian actor who played Mola Ram, had reservations about the role. He agreed to participate only after Spielberg convinced him that the story was fictional and not intended to be a reflection of actual religious practices. There was also the infamous dinner scene at Pankot Palace. During this sequence, Indiana Jones and his companions are served a bizarre array of dishes, including chilled monkey brains, eyeball soup, and live baby snakes. While clearly intended to be shocking and comedic, the scene was widely criticized for presenting Indian cuisine and culture as strange, primitive, and unappealing. In reality, none of these foods are traditional Indian dishes. They were based on old urban myths and exaggerated stories, not on any authentic culinary tradition. Even Spielberg later acknowledged that the dinner scene was culturally insensitive. He admitted that the ideas came more from an attempt to entertain rather than educate, but in hindsight, it contributed to the negative perception of the film's handling of Indian culture. The reaction from the Indian government was strong enough that they denied the filmmakers permission to shoot in India. As a result, much of the film was shot in Sri Lanka instead. Despite these issues, Temple of Doom still delivered memorable action and helped define the Indiana Jones brand. But even Spielberg himself has mixed feelings about it. In interviews years later, he stated that it was his least favorite film in the series. He explained that the darker tone came partly from personal struggles at the time, including his divorce. George Lucas, who co-wrote the story, was also reportedly going through a difficult period. That mood, both creators admitted, seeped into the tone and themes of the film. Spielberg also addressed the criticism surrounding the film's use of racial and cultural stereotypes. While he defended the need for powerful villains in adventure stories, he acknowledged that some choices in Temple of Doom went too far. He reiterated that the Thuggee cult was never meant to be a realistic depiction of any culture or religion, but rather a fictional enemy designed to create high-stakes conflict. Sylvie expressed regret over the way some scenes were interpreted. and said he would approach those elements differently if given the chance today. For all its controversy, the film still made a massive impact. It introduced audiences to Short Round, played by Ke Huy Quan, who would go on to become a fan favorite. The minecart chase remains one of the most exciting sequences in adventure film history, blending practical effects and tight choreography in a way that still holds up decades later. The film's soundtrack, once again composed by John Williams, helped elevate the tension and energy of every scene. In the years since its release, Temple of Doom has been re-evaluated many times. Some critics now view it as an ambitious, if flawed, attempt to take the Indiana Jones franchise in a new direction. Others still see it as an example of Hollywood's tendency to sensationalize and misrepresent non-Western cultures. What's clear is that the film sparked real conversations about ratings, representation, and the balance between entertainment and responsibility. It also played a crucial role in shaping the future of the franchise. The backlash and introspection that followed Temple of Doom influenced how The Last Crusade was made. The third film returned to a lighter, more grounded tone and focused on father-son dynamics rather than occult horror. Spielberg himself said that after Temple of Doom, he wanted to make a movie that felt more fun and less intense. Despite everything, Temple of Doom remains an important part of Indiana Jones's legacy. It shows how storytelling choices, even when controversial, can have long-lasting effects, not just on a franchise, but on the wider film industry. From inspiring new movie ratings to sparking global cultural debates, the film proved that adventure stories, even fictional ones, don't exist in a vacuum. They carry weight, and the way they portray people, history, and belief systems matters. By the time Indiana Jones reached its fourth installment in 2008, the franchise had become one of the most iconic in film history. However, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull became one of its most polarizing chapters. Audiences were excited to see Harrison Ford return to the role after nearly 20 years, but one particular scene quickly overshadowed the rest of the film: the infamous refrigerator escape. In the film, Indiana Jones finds himself at a nuclear test site in Nevada during the 1950s. With no time to flee, he hides inside a lead-lined refrigerator just before a nuclear bomb detonates. The explosion sends the fridge flying through the air. After tumbling across the desert, it lands safely, and Indy climbs out unharmed. While intended to be a fun, over-the-top action beat, the scene immediately became a point of contention. Viewers criticized its implausibility, saying it defied the laws of physics in a way that even Indiana Jones couldn't justify. The term "nuking the fridge" quickly entered popular culture. Much like jumping the shark had come to symbolize the moment a TV show loses its credibility, nuking the fridge became shorthand for when a film or franchise pushes believability too far. The backlash was widespread. Online forums, critics, and even scientists weighed in. Physicists pointed out that the blast would have propelled the refrigerator at an estimated speed of over 800 miles per hour, subjecting Indy to extreme G-forces that would have shattered bones and liquefied organs. Radiation exposure from the nuclear fallout would have been fatal, even if he survived the blast. Interestingly, the fridge scene was not originally written for Indiana Jones. In early drafts of Back to the Future from 1984, Marty McFly was supposed to time travel using a refrigerator rigged with a nuclear device at a desert test site. The idea was scrapped when producers became concerned that children might imitate it by locking themselves inside fridges. Spielberg, who produced Back to the Future, remembered the concept and repurposed it years later for Indiana Jones. He later admitted that including it may have been a mistake. In interviews, he said that while the idea felt nostalgic and cinematic at the time, he eventually realized how damaging it was to the film's reputation. Harrison Ford reportedly warned Spielberg and George Lucas about the scene, predicting that audiences wouldn't accept it. Nevertheless, Spielberg pushed forward. George Lucas defended the idea for years, even claiming he had a 6-inch thick stack of scientific research proving it was possible. Most experts disagreed, and the scientific community largely dismissed the claim. The scene became a lasting symbol of the film's departure from the grounded danger that had previously defined the franchise. Despite the backlash, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was financially successful, earning over $790 million, 0 cents, worldwide. However, the film left fans divided. Many felt it leaned too heavily into science fiction, particularly with the reveal of alien-like beings linked to the mysterious crystal skulls. While earlier films had elements of the supernatural, like the Ark of the Covenant or the Holy Grail, these were rooted in myth and religious lore. The extraterrestrial twist felt disconnected from the franchise's usual tone and themes. It marked a shift that not all audiences welcomed. Another issue was the film's use of CGI. While previous Indiana Jones films relied heavily on practical effects, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull incorporated a significant amount of digital imagery. This was especially evident in the jungle chase scene, which featured unrealistic vine-swinging sequences and digitally enhanced animals. Critics and longtime fans noted that the reliance on CGI removed the tactile, authentic feel that had made the original trilogy stand out. Still, the film wasn't without its strengths. Karen Allen's return as Marion Ravenwood brought a sense of continuity and nostalgia. Their on-screen chemistry remained strong, and the revelation that Indy had a son, Mutt Williams, played by Shia LaBeouf, added a new family dynamic to the story. However, Mutt's character didn't resonate with everyone. Some viewers saw his role as a forced attempt to pass the torch, while others simply felt his rebellious attitude clashed with the tone of the film. Amid all this, fans continued to dig into the past of the franchise, unearthing deleted scenes and lost footage from earlier films. One of the most discussed was a missing scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark that would have clarified a key plot moment. In the final act, Indiana tells Marion to close her eyes as the Ark is opened, sparing them from its deadly power. But the movie never explains how Indy knew to do this. In a deleted scene, Imam, the character who interprets the Staff of Ra headpiece, reads a warning about the Ark, saying that anyone who touches or looks upon it will die. This scene was removed to improve pacing, but its absence left viewers puzzled. Another cutscene involved Salah, played by John Rhys Davies. Originally, he was meant to help Indy escape the map room by lowering a rope. When he accidentally dropped it, he improvised by tying together bedsheets and a stolen Nazi flag. In a humorous moment, he spilled boiling tea on a German soldier. The scene had a light comedic tone, and some of Salah's lines were improvised. Spielberg eventually removed it, feeling it disrupted the serious momentum of the plot. Still, fans who later saw storyboards and behind-the-scenes clips found it endearing. Over the years, several of the franchise's deleted scenes have resurfaced online. In particular, the rehearsal footage of the original sword fight in Raiders has fascinated fans. The famous moment where Indiana shoots the swordsman in the Cairo market was originally planned as a full-blown action sequence. Actor Terry Richards spent weeks preparing intricate sword choreography. The fight would have lasted nearly 10 minutes and included the use of props in the marketplace, like hanging meat and baskets. However, while shooting in Tunisia, Harrison Ford came down with dysentery. Too weak to perform the scene, Ford joked that he should just pull out his gun and shoot the swordsman. Spielberg liked the idea so much that he scrapped the choreographed scene and filmed the quick gunshot instead. The change not only saved production time and money, but also became one of the most iconic moments in cinema. Rehearsal clips from the original scene later appeared on DVD and Blu-ray releases, fueling interest in what might have been. Even the comedic tone of the moment became a defining feature of Indiana Jones. It reinforced that Indy wasn't a superhero. He was practical, resourceful, and human. He didn't always win by brute force. Sometimes he won by making smart, unexpected decisions. This contrast to typical action heroes made him more relatable. As the years passed, Indiana Jones continued to influence popular culture. Archaeologists noticed an uptick in student interest after the release of Raiders of the Lost Ark. While the field of archaeology differs greatly from the on-screen portrayal, no giant boulders or ancient traps, it inspired a generation to see history as exciting. Academic programs and museums began to embrace the connection, recognizing that entertainment could be a gateway to education. Even in fashion and design, Indiana Jones left his mark. The fedora, leather jacket, satchel, and whip became a visual shorthand for adventure. Costume designer Deborah Nadoolman based his look on 1930s explorers, and it became so iconic that it influenced everything from video game characters like Nathan Drake in Uncharted to Halloween costumes and theme park attractions. The character of Indiana Jones became a brand in himself. Musically, John Williams' score played a huge part in embedding the franchise into public memory. His rousing adventure theme became instantly recognizable, standing alongside his work on Star Wars, Jaws, and Harry Potter. The music's ability to elevate emotion and signal excitement contributed heavily to the series' enduring appeal. In 2023, the franchise concluded with Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Harrison Ford, now 80 years old, returned for one last adventure. The film explored themes of aging, legacy, and what it means to be a hero in changing times. While it received mixed reviews, it provided a proper farewell to a character who had defined the action genre for over 4 decades. Looking back, the Indiana Jones films weren't perfect. They made creative choices that sparked debate and criticism, but they also inspired millions. They combined history, myth, and action in a way few others had. The characters' influence extended far beyond the screen, shaping everything from archaeology programs to video game narratives. Even today, Lego sets, themed rides, and academic discussions continue to reference Indiana Jones. And, if all goes well, Lego Sets 49 might do it too. Ultimately, Indiana Jones wasn't just about finding treasure. His greatest trait was persistence, the refusal to quit no matter how rough things got. Whether he was facing Nazis, supernatural forces, or studio deadlines, he kept going. And in doing so, he reminded audiences around the world that the real adventure isn't always about what you find. It's about the journey, the lessons, and the courage to keep moving forward.